Hello and welcome back to another episode of the ShefF1 Podcast with myself, Rudy Blunt-Brown, and joining me as always is Seb Alston. Unfortunately, we've got no Amy with us this week again, but she will be back in time for the Spanish Grand Prix preview in about 2 weeks' time, and in the meantime, there will be some content coming out in that sort of 2-week-long period. But today, we're going to be talking about the Canadian Grand Prix from last weekend, and what was, in my opinion, the race of the season so far, the best race of the season so far, to be specific. I mean, Seb, do you share the same views? Lots of interchangeable weather conditions, creating loads of different strategy options. I mean, what were your thoughts overall on the race weekend?
Yeah, it was super exciting. It's sort of that one of those weekends where it reminds you why you love F1 so much. It was just, yeah, I mean, we've had quite a few weekends in a row now where it's been pretty dull and it's just sort of been, predictable what's going to happen. This weekend, everything about it from qualifying to the race was just, you had no idea what was going to happen. You didn't, even the whole way throughout the race, you didn't know who was going to win, and we haven't had that for quite a long time now. And yeah, interchangeable conditions, different strategies, everything was just, there was always something happening at some point in the race, some sort of battle throughout the grid, and it was, super exciting. And I think, definitely by far the weekend of the season, and probably one of the best races I can remember for quite a long while now, actually, in terms of just chaos everywhere.
Yeah, high praise indeed, but it did deserve it. It was a really, like you say, really unpredictable weekend. Properly shook up the grid's performance, I think. Going into it, you were thinking, okay, maybe Ferrari will drop off a little bit, but not quite to the extent in which they did. I think neither of them made it into Q3 for the first time in about 3 years, which is utterly mental. And then the pace of the Mercedes car as well. I mean, no one expected George Russell to finish on pole position in qualifying, and that was just excellent to see. I mean, I truthfully missed qualifying live. I have gone back and watched it sort of on repeat, but when I saw the notification flash up on my phone and see George Russell taking pole position, I was just baffled. And you put it perfectly. It's one of them weekends that reminds you why you love Formula One so much. It was just so hard to predict, and even when you're watching the race itself, we kind of had it at Monaco where there was that 4-car fight for the lead, and you're thinking maybe someone other than Leclerc could win this, but it was sort of pretty much decided from the beginning that it would be Charles's race to lose. But Charles's race to lose, but he will end up winning it, if that makes sense. Canada, it really was, because there were so many different cars that could have won that race in terms of from different teams. Perez was nowhere to be seen, but Verstappen was doing really well in what was, I think, an injured Red Bull by the end of it, if that makes sense. He went over a curb at one point. I'm pretty sure something flew off, which saw a bit of a damage to his pace, never mind just the car. But both McLarens were kind of punchy, although Piastri ended up falling back into a battle with both Mercedes. But then both Mercedes cars, they both had the pace at some points to win that race. I mean, Hamilton, although he didn't finish on the podium, was just so close to doing so, and I'm pretty sure he finished with fastest lap, if I'm not mistaken, or at least he picked it up a few times. And it was Lewis's best weekend for a while, and that attitude shift from how we've been very vocal about Lewis at the end of races in interviews this season, and how he's been a little bit immature, and there clearly isn't as much care or passion. But when something a good result was on the line, Lewis's body language and just his overall interview answers, he was genuinely devastated with his performance, despite the fact that it was one of his best drives for a while. He labelled it as the worst race he'd done for quite some time, which I think we can disagree with that, considering some of the performances from earlier this season. But no, Seb, what did you make of the Russell pole? How unexpected was that?
Yeah, it was, even though we saw in the practice sessions, that they were quick, I still think we all thought McLaren, they're going to pull out of the bag. They're the favourites going into this weekend. And even Verstappen, we know that, ultimately when it comes down to one lap, he can pull something out of the bag. And it was still, even actually, Russell did it on his first flying lap in Q3 as well. So even then, even though he was on provisional pole, you did thought, okay, when everyone comes out for their second runs on fresh tyres, they're gonna pass him. Especially seeing as Hamilton was actually so close to him until sector 3 where he dropped off. But no, Russell didn't even improve in his second flying lap, and Verstappen did improve, but it just couldn't get it in the end. And for it to be identical times, I mean, it is unlucky for Verstappen. It was actually a really good lap from him. George Russell, they used to call him Mr. Saturday. I feel like we haven't heard that for a while, even though he's been doing so well in qualifying over Hamilton. But he did prove for the first time in a while that, he's really got that pace. And maybe, you know, a few doubts maybe about him being Mercedes team leader. He's sort of put that to bed this weekend, even though he did make a couple of mistakes when it actually came to the race, but still really good weekend from him. And yeah, I mean, just qualifying in general was insane because, you know, you're looking at the top 5, split by less than 2 tenths, and even down to P7 split by less than 3 tenths. I mean, that is what we want to see. That's what these regulations were supposed to bring in. So, you know, super close race. And to be fair, I think we have seen in qualifying the gaps being pretty low, but I feel like we haven't seen them this low for I can never remember. Actually, it's so close, so competitive, and anyone could have taken pole if you made just a tiny bit of improvement or something like that. You could have seen you on pole position, and yeah, I think it was a super entertaining qualifying. And you know, maybe we're thinking now, we don't want the new regulations to come because, you know, this is super exciting now.
Yeah, and it can only get closer, I think, as well. 2025, the last year of this sort of cycle of regulations, usually when the cars are at their quickest. And, you know, it could be, say the same sort of weather conditions happen again at Canada next year. In those 2025 cars, we could be for an even more intense and close qualifying session. You know, you're talking about the top 5 and the sort of the top 7 as well, how diverse it was. I mean, we saw Daniel Ricciardo qualify P5, you know, RB's best qualifying result of this season. And, I mean, he was phenomenal all weekend, to be fair, despite the fact that at the start of the weekend, something that grabbed the headlines, particularly on the Friday, was Jacques Villeneuve and his comments on Sky Sports about how, you know, he shouldn't even be in the sport anymore. And you know what? We were also very critical of him going into the weekend as well. A bit of a do-or-die weekend for Ricciardo, and my God, did he do it. But, yeah, P5, really solid result, really solid lap. And then when it came to the race, he converted it really nicely as well. Just to loop back to George Russell, though, you did mention how there is this sort of doubt of him being the Mercedes team leader for the foreseeable future. But you know what? There really was a huge momentum shift, I'd say, this weekend. While he has been the better of the two drivers by a considerable amount, I think it's a case of Hamilton drove so well in the race, but Russell still managed to one-up him and the McLaren of Oscar Piastri as well, despite the fact that he made that, you know, what looked to be a really costly error trying to overtake him going into the World Champions. And then he recovered it really well. Pace was really strong, really consistent, and was able to make the move sort of earlier in the straight, you know, for, you know, a second time round. And we saw some great overtakes, I think, in the race as well. One that springs to mind, just to completely sort of change the subject, was that Alex Albon one, where he used 2 cars in the midfield as a sort of moving chicane just to then make a dive into the Wall of Champions, a really difficult corner to overtake in. There was just some excellent close racing action this weekend. And there was one, I think Pierre Gasly made a move on Perez as well, which was just excellent in the wet as well. And yeah, loads of really tight battles, loads of, because obviously whole the strategy was so mixed up. You know, we had so many different sort of varying levels of pace and difficulty in terms of car to car, how it was for the drivers in those conditions. It was just so fun to watch. And then I mentioned Pierre Gasly there as well, Seb. I mean, I'm sure you'll be happy with his performance this weekend. Double points for Alpine, which is a huge step forward. Just what was the difference this weekend in comparison to those earlier this year, where they've just been terrible?
I think obviously you do have to look at, you know, the amount of people that DNF'd. I mean, ultimately that helped a lot. But, you know, their strategy was on it. I think when it came to Ocon, keeping him out on the inters for that opening stint, extending it, that ultimately proved to be the correct decision. I mean, he jumped up from starting P18 with that grid penalty to actually running at P8 at one point. And, you know, he was able to hang on well. I think having the interchangeable conditions, I think, really suited them because it was able to, you know, it's a sort of thing where you're able to see the driver quality come out a bit more. And I think that, you know, even though their car, you know, at times, you know, hasn't been good at all, you know, they have gradually improved to the point where they're somewhat competitive, and having these interchangeable conditions, I think you can really have that driver edge. And we know Ocon and Gasly, they're both decent in the wet, they're both decent in these conditions, and yeah, they both proved that, you know, they are still really solid drivers. And maybe, you know, people might forget about them at times because they haven't had the you know, the machinery to prove it. But this weekend, both of them were absolutely on it. You know, Gasly and Ocon both making some really good moves. Ocon, you know, yeah, I mean, he was incredible at points, and he should have finished P9 ultimately. Obviously, that driver swap at the end, a bit contentious. You know, Ocon, you know, realistically, he deserved P9. He did a good enough job on the strategy to get P9, and obviously, you know, Gasly was never really going to catch Ricciardo at the end there, and you know, should have given the position back probably. But yeah, it's a really good weekend for the team. I think that. And maybe ended on a bit of a dampener with Ocon, you know, maybe, you know, creating a bit of tension in the team, just, with his comments afterwards.
I think it's got to the point though where it can't get any more tense at Enstone though, realistically for them. Yeah, after Monaco, it's I think it's sort of reached the limit now. So I think anything, it's just free game at this point.
Yeah, I think so for Ocon. I think maybe if he was maybe still in the fight for that seat, I think he maybe would have come out in interviews afterwards and been like, yeah, I'm disappointed, but it's a team game and that's what happened. Whereas he was a bit feisty about it and actually quite defensive of himself, which I think fair enough. I do see his point, but it was a bit disappointing, I guess. But double points for them, first time in this season. Yeah, I think the only way is up for them. Even though qualifying, maybe the actual raw pace still isn't quite there. I think that, still promising. And actually, they're 3 points, I think, ahead of Williams now. So, not too bad. And only a couple of points off Haas. So, what looked like an absolutely terrible season. And it's still not a good season for them. But it's slowly, falling into place for them, I think.
Yeah, things surely on the up for Alpine now, especially after such a turbulent weekend in Monaco. Nice contrast, I think, in Canada to move on and score some double points, which was, I think, definitely a solid result for them. Another sort of a minor helping hand as well. Especially with Ocon, he was meant to be starting P20, but then both Sauber cars opted for wet weather setups for the race, which meant they had to start from the pit lane instead. So I think they just took advantage of loads of opportunities that sprang out to them, stuff like the wet weather coming out, stuff like the 5 DNFs, other setups. It was just, like you said, they played the strategy really well, just kept their cool, and it was, the best Alpine weekend we'd seen for a very, very long time. Now, a team that had a terrible weekend, if we move on now, was Ferrari. Mentioned it earlier that they failed to make it into Q2, both cars for the first time since 2021. And, what went wrong there? It seemed to be all the Mercedes-powered cars doing really well as the Red Bull powertrains of the RB and the Red Bull cars themselves, excluding Sergio Perez. I think it was just the Ferrari engines must have struggled this weekend because every other team seemed to be doing better than Ferrari. Yeah. Double DNF in the end, mechanical fault as well as the incident Sainz had with Albon. That was embarrassing from Carlos Sainz as well. To lose the car so easily like that at such a slow speed, and then it was a case of the incident from Sainz's half didn't even look that bad. It didn't look like the car got too damaged, although I think an end plate came off on the rear wing, which would have just made it too difficult to drive. But anything else that went wrong for Ferrari?
Just a horrendous weekend, wasn't it? I think both going out in Q2. I think it was a strategy error. I think they did have another set of fresh softs to go on to, and they just didn't do it because they were trying to save them, and ultimately that proved wrong. They didn't have the pace to just go round and save a set of tyres. That was really poor from them, and it was very much. It felt like a sort of Binotto-esque weekend. This one, it was really poor from them. We sort of thought. They've sort of maybe turned a page and they've been relatively consistent. We haven't had this many errors within the team recently. But
strong weekend in Monaco as well. If we
obviously. And then, the Sainz incident, I think that's just poor. And then obviously Leclerc. Weird race for Leclerc. Obviously he, had the engine issue, but even then, putting him out on slicks when it was, clearly into his conditions and he was just slipping and sliding all over the place. Yeah, it was really weird strategy from them there, and maybe just giving it a go to see what was happening. But it was still crazy. I don't know what they were doing, but even without those issues, they didn't have the pace anyway. Sainz didn't have any issues, but he wasn't able to make his way through the pack. Was held up in the midfield, and maybe might have scored a couple of points in the end if he hadn't had that issue, hadn't had that DNF. But still, terrible weekend for them. I think they now have trying to fast forward some of their upgrades to get in for Spain when they could have actually taken a bit longer, but they're going to try and force them in to the car. And they need them. This was a weird weekend, and I know maybe the conditions, aren't maybe showing their true pace, but still really poor from them. If they, they were in for a title fight. That's what everyone was saying before this weekend. Was they were in a shout with the championship, and this weekend's put definitely some doubts in the minds of everyone, I think.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right there. I think it's a case of, as well, setup was so important this weekend, and one team that definitely got it right was RB or V-Carb Racing Bulls, whatever you want to call them. But it's a case of someone on commentary alluded to the fact that both rear wings and even the front wings were really, really skinny on the RB cars, which basically means that they weren't running much downforce, despite the fact that the wet weather conditions would have meant that you'd maybe needed a bit more of it than usual. And, cars that opted for the wet weather setups, I think Ferrari did, obviously Sauber did, and that obviously didn't work out for them as well. So I think it's a case of, the strategy calls, with the race being so unpredictable, they either look like geniuses, as did RB, or, the move that Ferrari made to put Leclerc on the hards really early, if that had paid off, which was unlikely, but, it could have happened, who knows, then they would have, it would have been wonderful, it would have been a masterstroke, but, yeah, it was just the worst case scenario for Ferrari all weekend, basically. But no, you're right, the pace was really, really poor, not least were they unlucky with Sainz's mistake and Leclerc's, engine complications. They just weren't running very well in the order at all. Struggling to overtake, getting, stuck in traffic and raw pace. I mean, just take their qualifying result, for example. There really was nowhere for them to go in terms of up the pack, which, and you're right as well, it's huge in this sort of championship fight that people were suggesting was about to, start hotting up. And, I'd say McLaren looked to be in a much better stead to provide some sort of challenge to Red Bull and Max Verstappen if there is going to be one by the end of the season. Certainly with a weekend like that, Ferrari need to forget about it as soon as possible, and ahead of the Spanish Grand Prix, maybe a track that will suit their strengths a little bit more, considering their pace around Monaco in comparison to Canada, and Spain sort of being more on the higher downforce side of things than Canada is. Then we'll have to wait and see for that. But I think definitely something that they'll want to leave behind them as soon as possible. But terrible weekend for Ferrari, and much to improve. I mean, I was talking about strategy and setup earlier as well, and I mean, Haas, another weekend where they were arguably the most entertaining team on the grid. I mean, they were the only team to opt for the full wet weather condition tyres at the start. Everyone else started on the inters, and we saw Kevin Magnussen shoot up from P14 to P4 in a couple of laps. It was just wonderful entertainment. Unfortunately for them, the rain didn't get any stronger, and so they had to box for the inter, and then eventually, the softer the slick tyres as well eventually. But they tried to do that thing where they used one car as a cork for the other car. Magnussen pitted first because there was more of a window for him to do so, to go onto the inters, and they kept Hulkenburg out on the wets because he just about had enough pace to hold up this massive pack, sort of fighting for the last sort of couple points positions. Let Magnussen catch up. I mean, they did have a really dodgy pit stop, which meant that it wasn't as effective as it should have been. But they where they use one driver as the cork and the other driver as the pace car. Oh, I love it. I think it's proper midfield. I want to say it, but I'll avoid swearing on the podcast for now. But can you censor stuff? Do you know how to censor stuff in the edit?
Yeah, you can say
Sousery. I love it. Yeah. It's just it is the perfect sort of just I don't know, just mugging off everyone else in the midfield, and I love it. Thank you again, Haas, for another wonderfully entertaining race weekend. Unfortunately, no points for their labour, but they were really upset about the fact that they didn't really have anything to show for such a promising weekend, which is a nice sort of mentality change from Haas, because in the past, P11, P12, they would have taken that with open arms, and now, they're sort of thinking, we could have made the most of this weekend. We could have actually got more from it. We had the pace, we had the strategy, We just, other factors like the pit stop, for example, meant that they didn't really, maximise what they could have got from the weekend. And it's nice to see that mentality change from Haas. Otherwise, where's your upwards trajectory if you're just going to be happy with P11 and P12 every weekend for the remainder of your existence? I mean, did you make anything else of Haas's weekend? Did you like to see the sort of cork strategy again, or are you sort of sick of it by now?
Yeah, I think this was definitely a better way to go about it. Obviously, I have been critical in the past about, when Magnussen was doing it and was just cutting the corner to do it. I was quite critical of that. I think the way that
I love it though. I love it so much.
I love it, but I also hate it. I think I love it, but I don't know why people aren't criticising it, sort of thing. But this weekend, actually, no, I was definitely in favour of it. I think it should have worked really well. I think Magnussen would have been able to pick up a couple of positions without that really poor pit stop, which, that was really poor from the team. Basically ruined any chance they had of a point. After that, they had a pretty solid race, and there wasn't really anything to say about them. Obviously, Hulkenburg one thing we could talk about, which is maybe pretty minor, but the way he avoided Tsunoda at the end there was very impressive, I think I'd have to say. But yeah, it was a pretty solid weekend for them. I think Magnussen, maybe there'd been a bit of criticism about him recently, and maybe about his pace, and maybe obviously his seat's a bit in question. I think most people predict that he's not going to have a seat next year. This weekend he was actually pretty quick actually, and I think that maybe arguably just as quick as Hulkenburg, arguably quicker. I know he finished behind him in the end, but still I think Magnussen, it was a solid weekend for him, and maybe quite promising for him going forward that he does have the pace to compete, and he's going to want that second seat, which maybe might already be gone to Ocon. He seems to have suggested that he's got a seat already sorted out, but still he's going to have to be fighting for a seat now. And this I don't think it's going to be enough just having weekends like this, but it's definitely promising for him, I think.
Yeah, I was just thinking that actually Magnussen's pace was definitely better than we'd seen it in other races as of I'm gonna try that again. Fucking hell. Yeah, no, I was just thinking that actually Magnussen's pace this weekend was really, really strong, especially in comparison to some of the races that we have seen recently from him. And, you're right, there is sort of doubt and there are questions circulating, is he going to be in that Haas seat for next year? Is he going to have a drive for next year? And if he continues that level of performance, then I reckon he should be pretty safe by the end of the season. And, I think if we just move on to another team that, another driver in particular that had the pace, that had the sort of confidence in the weird conditions, that didn't have anything to show for it by the checkered flag. Alex Albon and Williams, it definitely was a weekend to forget for them. Albon, okay, he's had a really poor start to this season, but had a really strong showing in Monaco, and what could have been another few points in Canada. Wasn't meant to be after getting caught up in an incident with Carlos Sainz where he was just a passenger, and it was really unfair that he had to that his race had to end that way. But I alluded to it earlier. If you can sort of put a screenshot up of that overtake that he did, rather than getting us done for copyright using the full clip, that sort of moving chicane into the wall of champions, it was wonderful from Albon, and it really was the sort of Albon of old that we were seeing, much more confident, much more audacious, especially in strange conditions. I think he might have a car now that finally is capable of finishing in P10 pretty consistently. But again, just wasn't meant to be this weekend, unfortunately. And then as for his teammate Logan Sargeant, was that the final straw? Of course, there's no news of them getting rid of him anytime soon. But I think with performances like that, if that were to repeat itself, which isn't terribly unlikely, the incident towards the start of the race and then the incident that caused his DNF. Is he on borrowed time, Logan Sargeant?
Yeah, I think it's already pretty much confirmed by James Vowles that he's not going to be there next season. I think we all know that at this point. He said they're looking for world-class drivers. It's quite a damning statement that, Logan Sargeant isn't that. Yeah. And this weekend, it was such a poor weekend for him. In qualifying, it wasn't too bad. I think it was P13, and you're thinking, okay, he's not too bad. He's maybe a little bit of a step up. Maybe, if he can carry that over into the race, maybe he could get close to the points. But no, it was absolutely awful. You feel really bad from at this point, just slipping and sliding all over the place. It felt like he was every 10 seconds you were looking on the screen. And it was just, look, Sargeant's sliding off again. And ultimately, DNF. And I do think that it has now got to the point where Williams are in such a close fight at the moment with Alpine and Haas. And you think that if Albon hadn't had the DNF, then they would have actually been in the position to pick up a couple of points. Well, they still had another driver potentially. You should still be in that position, have another driver who's able to pick up those points. And you look at Alpine, both their drivers consistently are together. That's why they have so many incidents. It's because they're both so consistent and they're always in a position to pick up points. Williams only have realistically one car running that's going to be able to compete for points, and they need Sargeant to pick it up. And I think he's had enough time now. I do think they need to make the decision to try and find someone to get he's going to fill that seat and pick up points and be somewhat close to Albon. And I don't know who that is, as we were talking before we recorded, thinking about options who are out there, because you think maybe you'd want an experienced head. There aren't that many options out there. Whether they could maybe get Liam Lawson on loan, we think that's unlikely, but that would be an option. We saw how he, instantly got into the car last year, the AlphaTauri, and was able to perform. Elsewhere, there aren't that many options, but it seems at the point where any option might be better, and that's quite a damning statement of Sargeant that, I think they are going to look into someone else, and I think that it's quite sad because Sargeant, he's shown pace at times, but it just isn't consistent at all, unfortunately.
I mean, this weekend again, we were talking about it before we started recording. It was such a backmarker weekend from him.
Yeah,
it was definitely where his lack of experience certainly showed as well, not being able to deal with the interchangeable conditions very well at all and the close racing. I mean, he was just nowhere to be seen, basically. Yeah. And no, you're absolutely right. His pace wasn't up to standard the last weekend, and Albon, he did show that Williams was capable in finishing in the top 10, which would have been massive for Williams in their championship position wherever they want to finish. I'm not quite sure what the fact for 8th, 7th, something like that.
Yeah, well, Haas in 7th only on 7 points.
Yeah,
and Alpine are now only 2 points behind them. That could have been Williams.
I can imagine this time last year, Williams would have been much higher up in the championship than they are now. And if they had that sort of reasonably, not competent, I don't want to say Logan Sargeant's an incompetent driver, but if they had a consistent and just faster driver, if they had that faster driver and more experienced driver in the seat, then maybe it could be a totally different picture. But they've had this dynamic for a while now, Williams. It's been that driver that is a young, not hot shot, if you know what I mean, but that young sort of talent with potential that is already really quick, and then their teammate is just someone there that to just fill in the space. Really, I mean, the dynamic between Albon and Sargeant has been just that. Albon and Latifi, because they were teammates, right? I'm not just making that up. Yeah, it's weird. What a fever dream Williams team that was. But yeah, no, Albon and Latifi. Albon again significantly quicker. George Russell and Latifi. I mean, that wasn't even a contest. And then George Russell's first season at the team, it was a little bit of a different one, but he was still miles quicker than Kubica, despite what that one championship point and at the Hockenheim ring would have you suggest. But yeah, no, it was a shame for Williams, and like you were saying as well, there aren't that many options if they were to get rid of Sargeant mid-season. I think it's still too early to promote Antonelli. Mercedes don't want him to go to a different team and acclimatise himself there before they promote him, because they seem to be desperate to do so for 2025, of course, pending a respectable F2 championship result, of course. But I mean, the Williams Academy hasn't got an abundance of talent that is definitely ready for F1 yet. I think if it's a case of if you replace Logan Sargeant with someone in that Williams Academy, you'll just get pretty similar results, because again, the inexperience, they just won't be ready and they won't be quick enough, plain and simple. And then you look abroad or you look elsewhere, and if you go for experience, I mean, who's going to accept a contract for half a season knowing that they'll be probably replaced by Carlos Sainz by the end of it? It'd be a pretty demoralising move. It'd have to be someone totally out of a drive and just needing some cash or something like that. But maybe bring Nick de Vries back. He's having a pretty poor time in Formula E, but due to the car and not him, to be fair. And of course, he had that amazing debut race for Williams at Monza in 2022. There we go. Yeah. Jesus, man. And it was just, so maybe bring de Vries back, because it was clearly an environment that he was more comfortable in than AlphaTauri. Of course, it'd be a lot less pressure as well for de Vries, of course, because the hostile environment that Helmut Marko created for him at AlphaTauri, was just really, really. It obviously just didn't help his results. I mean, it was clear they got rid of him as soon as they could, basically, and. So maybe that Williams seat, no pressure at all. You're gone by the end of the year anyway. Just do what you like and have fun in that seat. Could be something that could sway de Vries back into F1. But that is, based on if Williams are going to sack Logan Sargeant, who they clearly don't rate at this point. I mean, you looked at the start of the season, subbing in Albon in Sargeant's car after Albon totaled it and wrecked it for the weekend. And then, all these things that James Vowles is saying in interviews, like you were saying, looking for a world-class driver. I mean, he even name-dropped Carlos Sainz as their number one target for 2025, which is, as Logan Sargeant, you're not going to want to hear that. But I think at this point, the writing's on the wall for him. I think he should be expecting sort of comments like that being made, because he hasn't been good enough through reasons that aren't just his fault. I mean, he is inexperienced and they have been mistreating him slightly. But yeah, I think the end is nigh for Logan Sargeant, unfortunately. The end is near, for Logan Sargeant, which is unfortunate. But we'll move on now. Okay, time to move on to our predictions now. So for those of you new round here, we do have a sort of select list of predictions that we like to make ahead of every single race weekend. We get a point for every correct prediction that we make, and we are keeping score, and at the end of the season, something will happen for the winner and maybe for the loser. Who knows? We still are yet to decide. But we have got select categories, like I said before, 1 point for every correct answer. And the first one that we do tend to review is pole position. We all got this wrong, because who on earth predicted George Russell to finish on pole in Saturday's qualifying session? None of us did. I know you watching this didn't, or you listening to this didn't, okay? Don't lie and pretend like you thought that was going to happen, because that was totally out of the blue. And my word, what a lap that was, to match Max Verstappen, despite the fact he set the lap before him, which usually means it would have been a slower lap. I mean, that Mercedes pace in qualifying, well, it fluctuated a little bit. I mean, Lewis Hamilton put in the second quickest time in the entire session overall in Q2. Unfortunately couldn't translate that pace into Q3, but Russell's pole lap, I mean, it was excellent.
Yeah.
So Seb and I predicted Max Verstappen, and Amy said Charles Leclerc. I mean, Max.
We were sort of right.
We were sort of right. Identical lap time to George Russell's pole, and maybe if stakes were higher in this prediction battle, if Amy wasn't so far ahead, then maybe we could argue that we deserve a point for that one. Maybe a half point, but as Amy isn't here, that does seem a little bit unfair to not have a verdict on it. But yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't going to be Charles Leclerc, especially based on that Ferrari pace, and it was marginal, but Max Verstappen did not get the job done for myself and Seb. Now, moving on now, we've got a couple more qualifying-based predictions, including the start of qualifying. So just because you finish on pole doesn't necessarily mean you've been the start of qualifying. However, if any of us said George Russell for the start of qualifying, we would have got the point for that, because I'm not being funny, he was on fire in Q3, especially so early on as well. Just his first flying lap, over and done with, nice and easy. We did not say George Russell. All three of us said something completely different. I said Oscar Piastri. I think I just sort of put all my eggs into one basket and said, look, Piastri's in good form. I need some points in this prediction championship fight, and why not back someone that I have been following pretty closely this season with great admiration. But no, Piastri, I mean, it wasn't terrible from him, although he was outqualified by his teammate. There was room for improvement, but not one that I'm sure he'll dwell over. It was really tight actually between him and Norris, if memory serves me correct. So, not a bad qualifying session at all from Piastri. And, I mean, you've not awarded a point for this one, so I'm sure we'll have a little debate in a few moments' time. Amy said your favourite, Pierre Gasly. And then, do you want to explain yours, Seb?
So I went for Nico Hulkenberg, and I based this purely off of vibes in the fact that he said it's one of his favourite circuits. And, well, Hulkenberg, it didn't look like it was one of his favourite circuits. Really poor qualifying from him out in Q1, so it's definitely not Hulkenberg. I haven't awarded one yet for this one. I think between Piastri and Gasly, I maybe would say Piastri. I know Gasly got into Q2 ahead of his teammate, but in Q2 he wasn't really able to put a great lap on the board. I know it wasn't miles off, but still, Piastri, I feel like, even though outperformed by his teammate, he was super close and maybe got them near the max of the car, whereas maybe Pierre, you might be able to say maybe, there was maybe a little bit more he could got out of the car. I know it was an Alpine, so it's hard to say, but yeah, I don't know. Who do you think it is between Piastri and Gasly?
I mean, naturally, I'm going to gravitate towards Piastri as my prediction. Although, Pierre Gasly, I mean, he didn't do anything in Q2 afterwards, qualifying P15, but Ocon didn't make it out of Q1. Maybe with a bit of a sort of, a damaged mindset, considering that, he was going to get that 5-place grid penalty, so maybe he wasn't pushing as hard as maybe he would have liked to. But, Gasly did a really good job to get into Q2, especially considering that Alpine in qualifying trim hasn't been particularly strong this season. Although I'd say, that really close margin between Piastri and Norris makes me think that, considering it was, to line up, what was it, P3 and P4?
Yeah, I think competing at the higher end of the grid, I think it's a lot more, there's more on the line, so I would say Piastri, I think. Yeah.
Okay, we'll award Oscar Piastri the point for that one, which means I pick up a point there, which is nice, because I didn't think I did very well that weekend, but star of quali. Not the objective star of quality, definitely George Russell in that regard, but out of Piastri, Gasly and Hulkenberg, will give the point to Oscar Piastri. Now, moving on to something that was a lot easier to predict, the flop of qualifying. I said Kevin Magnussen, rather reluctantly, but I just thought, I was swayed by your Hulkenberg argument, and I thought maybe he'll just get outperformed by Hulkenberg to the point where, won't be a great weekend, won't be a great qualifying session for him, and he has had a pretty patchy track record around Canada as well, and especially with such difficult conditions, it might have made things difficult for him, although they played into his favour in the end, which is, who'd have thought that anyway. But I said Magnussen, Amy said Stroll, who, to be fair, I mean, just, made it into Q3, out-qualified by Alonso, but you know what, this weekend, it was, I'd say it was on, he's doing better, he's looking a lot better, Lance Stroll, especially at the moment. He's starting to find a bit of a rhythm, a bit of a groove, especially considering because Fernando Alonso looks to be a little bit all over the place at the moment. So, nice and just solid from Lance Stroll, little P9, especially considering that Aston Martin wasn't meant to be quick round here. But yeah, no, not a bad job from Stroll at all. And then Seb, you pulled a blinder and said Sergio Perez. Elaborate on that one further.
Yeah, I think I said it before in the previous episodes. When it comes to this European season, and I know it's not in Europe, Canada, but whatever. When it gets to this stage of the season, in the last couple of years, he has dropped off a cliff. And I didn't expect him to do this badly, but do you know what? I don't think many people were that shocked, and I think that's pretty damning as well from Sergio Perez, is that he's out in Q1, and it's not even that big of a deal. Like, no one was going, oh, this is like absolutely what the hell, who would have thought this? It's sort of to be expected, and that is just, absolutely shocking from Perez. Definitely the awful qualifying, especially when you see Max, even though the Red Bull wasn't predicted to be as quick this weekend, Max was still he had the pace to be on pole, so yeah, I mean, Perez, it's just, I have no idea what's going on with him. He's just, I can't see him lasting that 2 years at all at this point, but yeah, weird qualifying from him.
Yeah, definitely a contract extension that turned a few heads, especially with not long afterwards Yuki Tsunoda confirming his commitment to RB for 2025 as well. Terrible from Sergio Perez once again in qualifying, something that he has had great difficulty with for a while now in the hands of that Red Bull. And did you see that stat? Okay, we were talking about him earlier, Logan Sargeant. Albon is, I think, 30-0 against him now in qualifying, although he's out-qualified Perez something like six times or something like that, which is utterly mental.
That's crazy, considering Albon 30-0, that just makes it even more embarrassing. Like,
ex-Red Bull
Perez,
driver.
what are you doing? What are you doing?
No, that was, I think, the Perez will want to forget about this terrible qualifying record and turn things around as soon as possible, especially considering the race didn't exactly go his way either, to put it plainly. But yeah, Seb gets the point for Sergio Perez on that one, and we'll move out of qualifying now and on to the race. Now, our race winner and podium prediction, we get 1 point for each correct driver in each podium position, and the only ones that were correct were my Lando Norris P2 prediction, and Seb, you correctly predicted Max Verstappen to finish the race in first. I mean, I can't really say anything else on it, to be honest. It was just a safe prediction for you to say that Max will convert the pole into a win, although it wasn't guaranteed. I mean, we were saying earlier there was a genuine fight for the lead, and no one really knew how it would pan out until maybe the last, 4 or 5 laps of the race. And even then, it was still up in the air, considering Max's damage that he seemed to have picked up earlier in the race as well. And there were overtakes for the lead, which was so refreshing to see. But yeah, I said Norris P2. I said Piastri to win, truthfully. And that obviously just didn't quite go to plan. And then as for Amy's predictions, she said a McLaren 1-2 in the form of Norris first and Piastri second, and Leclerc to finish third. And that obviously didn't happen because Ferrari were terrible. Now, let's move on to driver of the day. Finally, Amy, who is usually the prediction goddess, is getting her first point of the weekend. She said Lando Norris to finish as driver of the day. Although, you know what, Seb? I think you've been snubbed here a little bit.
I definitely have. I went for Esteban Ocon, who I think, objectively, I know I'm probably biased here, I think he was the driver of the day. I think going from P18 to finish, I'm going to say P9, because realistically, on merit, he was P9. Yeah, I think that's an incredible performance from him. I know maybe he got a little bit lucky with strategy, but at the end of the day, you make your own strategy. It's not luck at the end of the day. So, yeah, I think Ocon, compared to Norris, I know Norris maybe was unlucky in the fact that I think he probably should have won the race. And I think that maybe you could look at that and say, yeah, he was driver of the day in that regard. But still, I mean, it was a strategy error. It was a mistake not to box immediately under the safety car, and that cost him, and that was their decision. It wasn't anyone else's decision not to box. It was their decision. So, yeah, I don't know. I can see Norris obviously had a good race, and obviously, maybe was not in the quickest car, but was still able to be up there. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like Ocon should have had more of a shout for driver of the day, I think, than he did. I don't know what the vote was in the end, but I think as soon as Norris is anywhere up there for driver of the day, he's going to get it just because he's Lando Norris. So, bit of a shame.
No, you are right. The second Lando Norris is in within a sniff of a race win or even a podium, all the fans are just jumping straight on that driver of the day vote, and it's usually a pretty easy prediction to make. So we will give Amy the point for that one because she did say Lando Norris. I said Piastri again, like I said earlier, just chucked all my eggs into one basket. But yeah, no, Norris, I mean, look, it wasn't, he was up there. He was one of the drivers of the day, to be fair. He did show excellent pace throughout. Although I'd honestly argue that maybe George Russell was a little bit better, especially considering how much slower that Mercedes was supposed to be. You know, did the job over his teammate who was driving really well, did the job over Piastri, got the team's first podium of the season, and was in that fight for the race win, especially considering that Mercedes isn't as quick as the McLaren. It certainly hasn't been throughout the course of the season, and I'd say in Canada as well, that McLaren was still quicker than the Mercedes. But Norris was a strong contender for driver of the day, but I'm with you. We should give the point to Ocon, but Norris won the fan vote, so that gives Amy the point. Now, moving on to flop of the race, Amy and I sort of went for a strange prediction and said Verstappen, which, sort of lines up with the rest of my predictions okay, to be fair. Although Amy had a bit of a sort of stronger view on it than me. She thought he would retire from the race, and I just thought he wouldn't win, thus making him the flop because, he's Max Verstappen after all. So we gave you the point for Alex Albon, which, I mean, okay, very harsh. Very, very harsh. Considering his DNF was down to an error made by Carlos Sainz, Albon could have got some decent points for Williams, and I suppose, any retirement is sort of a flop weekend, I guess, but it wasn't Albon's fault. So I think reluctantly we'll give you the point, considering Max just wasn't
I think
a
if
flop.
he'd finished the race, I think none of us would be getting a point here.
No.
But just because just maybe you could make a very small argument that he could have potentially avoided Sainz. I mean, I'm not saying he could have.
No, okay.
But maybe, you might have some sort of, argument that he could have maybe done a little bit more. But, I mean, he wasn't a flop this weekend, but the team were a flop.
Yes, they were.
Yeah, I mean, it's very harsh. He wasn't a flop, and he would be very low down the order if you're saying who the actual flops were. You've got your Perez and Sainz and things like that. Albon wouldn't have been up there, but compared to Verstappen won the race. So, I think it's definitely Albon compared to that.
Yeah, I mean, we'll reluctantly give you the point, and of course, you are trailing me a little bit in this prediction battle, so we'll give you benefit of the doubt there. Okay, on to the penultimate one now, the best team of the weekend. Amy and I picking up points for McLaren. Seb said Ferrari. Basically, I mean, this is just an easy one. Ferrari were very bad, and McLaren were okay, but maybe not quite up to the standard that everyone was thinking. A lot of people, myself and Amy included, were expecting a 1-2 for McLaren, and obviously they didn't deliver on that, but they were just better than Ferrari. And I mean,
Ferrari had the worst team.
Yeah, by a country mile. I mean, who was the best team realistically? Probably Mercedes, if you had to give it to any team. Although
Mercedes is a difficult one because I do think they had the pace to get the win this weekend, and I think they didn't maximise their performance. So maybe the team that maximised the performance, I might say Alpine, to be honest.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, double points for Alpine.
P10 for the car that's, not the worst on the grid at this point, but definitely 8th or 9th quickest car on the grid. Double points. I think that maybe is my best team of the weekend, but...
Yeah, okay, no, you've swayed me there, to be fair. I think Alpine, team of the weekend for them. Although Amy and I both said McLaren, they were better than Ferrari, a point each for myself and Amy. Okay, finally now, the most anticipated one, the shock prediction. And finally, I've got my name on the board for a shock prediction being correct. Amy's got like 2 already because she is, as I said earlier, the prediction goddess. Have you got one yet, Seb?
I did. I got a double RBQ3, which actually is not that surprising. But maybe at the time it was a little bit more shocking, but nowadays I don't think it is. But yeah, first time, and it was actually quite well considering the circumstances. This is a shocking prediction, I've got to say.
Yeah, so I said Ocon to finish in the points. Now this is an interesting one because we base our shock prediction in terms of the point scoring, depending on how shocking the prediction is. We give out more points depending on that sort of scale. So say shock prediction, Perez to not make it to Q3. You're gonna get 1 point for that, but Ocon to finish in the points, considering the grid penalty, considering the friction within Alpine at the moment, considering that Alpine's pace as well, looking pretty unlikely. I'll say it now. I'll say, but either 2 or 3 points. I'll be pleased
I've
with.
got to say, though, when Amy got a Norris victory, she got 5 points for that.
Did she?
Yeah, and I think Esteban Ocon finishing the points with a 5 grid place penalty, with, nowadays he's going to be getting the not the optimal strategy, because actually Gasly did get on paper the optimal strategy.
Nearly missed out on points as well, considering they swapped the drivers, and then he almost, got beaten to it by Nico Hulkenburg as well.
I would say at least 4 points for this.
That is music to my ears, Seb. Thank you so much. Well,
I'll
let you decide. I can't obviously, have any influence on it because this is, it's subjective and stuff like that. I mean, just for anyone wondering as well, Amy said that Max would DNF, and Seb, you said that a red flag would give someone a huge advantage and they would win the race, which would have been so sick. And to be fair,
that was close. It could have happened.
It could have happened. It definitely could have happened. It was a very good prediction because, rain can throw anything into the mix. And but yeah, no, Ocon points was the only one that came true. P10 finish for him. Shall we say 4 points then?
I think 4 points, because also I don't want to give it 5 points because you're the closest person you're the person I'm closest to in the championship. So.
I don't think it was that shocking either, to be fair. I think if it was like Ocon top 5, then 5 points would be necessary.
No, top 5, that would be 10 points. that isn't, yeah. I would never see that happen.
But yeah, no, I just said Ocon points. I mean, technically I didn't get it right because I said points.
Yeah, he only got
P10,
points. So.
P10 is only a point. We'll say 4 points, so let's not have any further debate on that one. So
if we 7 points this week.
Tot it up now, that must be my best performance of the weekend.
Yeah.
I got 8, didn't I? Oh no, 7. Excuse me. Yeah, 7 points for myself.
38 points.
2 points for Amy and 3 points for Seb, leaving me on 38 points, closing the gap to Amy's 43 and Seb on 32. I'm sure something will come good for you eventually, Seb. You just got to do some of these like mental shot predictions, and eventually you can throw yourself back into the fight.
Ocon top 5 instead.
Ocon top 5, 10 points. Well, you know what? We said it here now. If you do predict that at some point, then we'll give you 10 points for that, and that will put you quite nicely into the championship fight. But anyway, that's just about all we've got time for this week's episode. If you have enjoyed, make sure to click subscribe, like the video, or like us on Spotify or any other listening platform that you're listening to us on, and we do greatly appreciate the support. Don't worry as well, we understand there is a bit of a gap from now until the next race weekend in Barcelona, but in this sort of 2-week-ish period, we'll put out some more content for you in the meantime. So don't go anywhere, and hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you later. Goodbye.